Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to challenge you, not merely to learn more, but to learn how to think. Our world is drowning in information, yet starving for truth. Data streams across our screens every second, but very little of it teaches us how to discern, how to separate the counterfeit from the authentic, the temporary from the eternal. Thinking correctly is not simply a matter of intelligence, it is a matter of discipline, of courage, and of allegiance to truth itself. You see, most people inherit their worldview without ever testing it. They accept opinions as fact, traditions as reality, and popular consensus as wisdom. But truth does not bend to majority vote. Correct thinking requires you to challenge assumptions, to trace every claim back to its source, to hold every idea under the light of reason and the weight of eternal perspective. I am not here to tell you what to think. I am here to teach you how to think. For once you master the discipline of correct thinking, you will no longer be enslaved by deception, confusion, or fear. You will stand unshakable, even in a world built upon shifting sand. When we begin with the matter of thinking correctly, the first step must be truth over tradition. The vast majority of people do not realize how much of their mental framework is simply inherited. We are taught what to believe from a young age, and those ideas often become so ingrained that we never pause to ask whether they are valid. We confuse familiarity with truth. Just because something has been repeated for centuries or affirmed by respected voices does not automatically make it correct. History is filled with examples of traditions that were not only false, but destructive. People once believed the earth was flat, that the sun revolved around the earth, that disease was caused by angry spirits. These were not fringe beliefs. They were mainstream convictions, defended by the leading minds of their time. And yet, they were wrong. Tradition often feels safe because it is comfortable. But truth is not always comfortable. It often unsettles us, confronts us, and demands that we let go of cherished assumptions. Correct thinking begins when you have the courage to ask, why do I believe this? What is the source of this claim, and does it stand up under scrutiny? A person who never questions the foundations of his beliefs lives in a prison of second-hand thought. He might be sincere, but sincerity does not equal accuracy. You can be sincerely wrong. If your thinking is merely borrowed from tradition, you are essentially outsourcing your mind to the consensus of others. There is a subtle danger here. Tradition is not always false. Many traditions are built on truths discovered by those who came before us. But tradition must never be the ultimate authority. It must always be held accountable to truth. The problem comes when we confuse tradition with truth and elevate it to a position it was never meant to hold. When tradition is treated as unquestionable, it becomes a form of idolatry. Correct thinking, therefore, requires intellectual humility. It means being willing to admit that we might have been wrong, or that what we assume to be permanent may only be provisional. It means that even if 99 voices tell us the same thing, we are still responsible for testing it for ourselves. Truth is not determined by numbers. It is discovered by diligent pursuit. 1 billion people can believe a lie, and it will still remain a lie. One person can cling to the truth against the entire world, and that truth will stand. Truth over tradition is not an abstract idea. It has practical consequences. In our daily lives, we must discern between what is handed down by culture, family, media, or authority figures, and what actually reflects reality. To think correctly, you must be more loyal to truth than to tradition, more devoted to reality than to comfort, more committed to accuracy than to popularity. That is where wisdom begins, by choosing truth even when tradition resists it. The second principle of correct thinking is understanding the difference between the map and the territory. A map is a representation, a model that helps us navigate, but it is never the same as the land it describes. Too often, people confuse their mental maps, their philosophies, theories, or worldviews with reality itself. But a map can be distorted, incomplete, or outdated. It can guide you in a general direction, but if you cling to it without verifying the actual terrain, you risk walking off a cliff. In the same way, ideas, ideologies, and cultural narratives may give us frameworks to interpret life, but they are not reality itself. They are only models. Thinking correctly requires the discipline to distinguish between a symbol and what it represents, between a theory and the facts it seeks to explain. Science, for instance, is filled with models, maps of how the universe might operate, These models can be useful, but they are never final. They are approximations. To confuse the model with reality is intellectual arrogance. To hold a theory as untouchable truth is to worship a map instead of walking the land. A wise thinker keeps the distinction clear and remembers that all models must remain open to revision. This is not only an intellectual matter, it affects how we live. Consider how people cling to economic theories, political ideologies, or even religious traditions as though they are reality itself. When someone challenges their map, they feel personally attacked, as if reality itself were crumbling. But in truth, it is only their perception of the world that is being questioned. A strong mind welcomes such challenges because it is better to correct a faulty map than to keep walking in the wrong direction. Another danger in confusing the map with the territory is that it blinds us to new discoveries. If you assume your current understanding is the final word, you will never recognize when reality is trying to teach you something greater. Many breakthroughs in history occurred because someone dared to test the map against the territory and found the map lacking. Progress happens when people acknowledge that models must change to reflect reality, not the other way around. Correct thinking means holding your models lightly, but holding truth tightly. It means you use maps as tools, but you never mistake them for the terrain. This perspective fosters humility because it reminds us that our current understanding will always be partial. It also cultivates discernment because we learn to test ideas against the reality they claim to represent. In the end, truth will not conform to our maps. Our maps must conform to truth. To think correctly, we must always be willing to redraw, refine, or even discard our mental maps when reality demands it. Only then can we walk with confidence, not deceived by illusions, but guided by what is real. The third principle of thinking correctly is the authority of the source. Every idea, every piece of information, every claim you encounter has an origin. It comes from somewhere, and the reliability of that origin matters immensely. In a world where voices compete for your attention every second, discerning the credibility of the source is as important as evaluating the message itself. Many people fall into error because they never ask the most basic question: who said this, and can they be trusted? A claim can be bold, persuasive, even wrapped in impressive language, but if the source is unreliable, the message cannot stand. Correct thinking demands that we evaluate not just the content, but the integrity of the fountain from which it flows. Consider how rumors spread. A half-truth whispered from an untrustworthy source can circle the globe in moments, while the truth limps behind. Yet many will believe the rumor simply because it was repeated often enough. Social media amplifies this problem, creating an environment where the loudest voice drowns out the most credible one. To think correctly, you must resist the temptation to measure truth by volume or popularity. Instead, you must look deeper. Who is speaking? What is their track record? Do they have something to gain by persuading me? Is this information supported by evidence that can be verified independently? Authority of the source also extends to personal life. How often do we adopt ideas simply because they come from someone we admire, trust, or love? While influence is natural, it can be dangerous if we equate respect with reliability. A person may be sincere, but sincerity does not equal accuracy. Even the most well-meaning individual can pass along error if they themselves have not examined their sources carefully. Correct thinking requires the maturity to appreciate someone's character without uncritically adopting their conclusions. At the same time, we must avoid the opposite error of dismissing a truth simply because we dislike the messenger. Reality is not altered by personality. An unpleasant voice can still deliver an accurate message, and a despised figure may still be a trustworthy source on a particular matter. Correct thinking means separating the reliability of the information from our personal biases toward the one delivering it. This principle has eternal weight as well. If you want to think correctly about life, purpose, and destiny, you must ask where your ultimate source of authority lies. Do you trust shifting cultural opinion, or do you root yourself in a source that has proven itself consistent and enduring? Information without a trustworthy foundation leaves you vulnerable to every passing wave of ideology. But information grounded in a source that is true, tested, and incorruptible equips you to navigate life with confidence. Correct thinking requires discipline, patience, and courage. Discipline to investigate, patience to sift through evidence, and courage to reject what is unreliable, no matter how appealing it may sound. For in the end, truth does not depend on how convincing the words are, but on the authority of the source that speaks them. The fourth principle of correct thinking is the discipline of logic. Logic is not about being argumentative or coldly rational. It is the safeguard that keeps your mind from being hijacked by error. Without logic, you are at the mercy of persuasion, emotion, and manipulation. With it, you gain the tools to test arguments, to separate valid reasoning from empty rhetoric, and to see through the illusions that cloud so much of public discourse. Thinking correctly means refusing to be swayed by style over substance. It means you are willing to ask, does this conclusion actually follow from the premises? Is this argument built on solid ground, or is it merely a castle in the sand? Our age is not lacking in clever speakers or sophisticated communication. Advertisers, politicians, and influencers all know how to craft words that stir emotion, but emotion does not equal truth. Logic reminds us that something may sound appealing and still be false. Consider the countless fallacies that infiltrate our thinking daily. The appeal to authority that assumes someone must be right simply because of their position. The ad hominem attack that dismisses a claim by insulting the person making it. The bandwagon fallacy that assumes popularity equals accuracy. Without the discipline to recognize these traps, the mind becomes vulnerable to manipulation. Logic is not natural to the human condition. It must be trained. Our instincts often lead us to react emotionally, to protect our egos, or to confirm what we already want to believe. Correct thinking requires that we rise above those instincts and test our reasoning with clarity. This is why logic is a discipline. It demands practice, self-awareness, and humility. It requires us to slow down, to examine the steps of an argument carefully, and to ensure that the conclusion truly emerges from the evidence. Logic also sharpens discernment in daily decisions. In conversation, it helps us separate genuine insight from empty slogans. In media, it allows us to distinguish reporting from spin. In personal choices, it prevents us from justifying actions with excuses that collapse under examination. A person who disciplines themselves in logic cannot be easily deceived because they are trained to look past appearances and ask the deeper questions. What are the facts? What assumptions are hidden here? Does the reasoning hold when stripped of emotional appeal? Yet logic by itself is not enough. Logic is a tool, and like any tool, it can be misused if the foundation is false. A perfectly logical argument can still lead to error if it begins with faulty premises. That is why logic must work hand in hand with truth, evidence, and trustworthy sources. Logic alone is not the destination, but it is an indispensable safeguard on the journey. Thinking correctly requires the courage to practice logic consistently, even when it forces you to abandon cherished assumptions or challenge popular narratives. It is the discipline that keeps your mind sharp, your judgment sound, and your path aligned with reality rather than illusion. The fifth principle of correct thinking is understanding the hidden worldview filters that shape perception. Every person sees the world through lenses, whether they realize it or not. These lenses are built from upbringing, culture, education, and personal experience. They act like tinted glasses, coloring everything we encounter. Most people are unaware of their own filters, and so they assume that what they see is reality itself. But in truth, they are seeing through a screen of presuppositions, assumptions, and biases. To think correctly, you must first recognize that you have filters, and then learn how to examine them. A worldview filter determines what you accept as plausible and what you reject outright. For example, if your worldview assumes that only material things exist, then any evidence for the supernatural will be dismissed before you even consider it. If your worldview assumes that truth is relative, then any claim of absolute truth will strike you as intolerant, regardless of its merit. The filter precedes the evaluation, often controlling conclusions before reasoning even begins. This is why two people can look at the same evidence and arrive at completely different interpretations. It is not the evidence that differs, it is the worldview through which the evidence is interpreted. Correct thinking requires you to examine your filters with honesty. Where did they come from? Were they handed to you by your culture? Were they inherited from your family? Did you adopt them uncritically from peers or media? If your worldview cannot withstand scrutiny, then it is not a filter worth keeping. Most people never perform this level of examination. They simply assume their lenses are neutral and obvious. But once you realize how much of your thought is shaped by hidden filters, you begin to question more deeply. This awareness also helps you understand others. Instead of being frustrated that someone cannot see the truth, you recognize that they are viewing the world through a different set of lenses. Their reasoning may be consistent within their framework, but the framework itself is flawed. This understanding produces both discernment and compassion. You no longer confuse disagreement with stupidity. You recognize it as the clash of worldviews. Correct thinking, therefore, is not only about refining your own filters, but also about identifying the filters in play when you engage with others. The danger of hidden filters is that they can blind us to reality. They act as gatekeepers, only letting through what confirms what we already believe. This is why people often become trapped in echo chambers, surrounded by voices that reinforce their assumptions. Breaking free requires intentional effort, exposing yourself to challenging ideas, testing them, and allowing truth to reshape your filters. To think correctly, you must surrender every filter to the standard of truth. A worldview that resists correction is not a lens, but a cage. But a worldview aligned with truth becomes a clear window through which reality can be seen as it truly is. The task of correct thinking is to clean that window daily so that perception is no longer clouded by hidden bias, but sharpened by reality. The sixth principle of correct thinking is learning to think with eternity in mind. Most people measure their decisions by what is immediate, what is comfortable, or what promises the greatest short-term benefit. This mindset narrows vision to the here and now, blinding the mind to the larger consequences of actions. But if you want to think correctly, you must adopt a perspective that stretches beyond the fleeting moment and considers the eternal weight of every choice. A life lived only for temporary gain is a life built on sand. It may look stable for a while, but when time passes and the storms come, it collapses. Thinking with eternity in mind begins by recognizing that life is not confined to this present chapter. Everything we do carries consequences beyond the visible horizon. Our decisions, words, and attitudes ripple into eternity. Correct thinking is not merely about avoiding error in logic or recognizing falsehood in tradition. It is about aligning your mind with values that endure forever. When you see life through the lens of eternity, temporary pleasures lose their grip and passing troubles lose their power to intimidate. You recognize that the most valuable investment is not in what fades, but in what lasts. This perspective transforms priorities. Suddenly, questions shift from, "What do I want now?" to "What will matter forever?" Wealth, reputation, and personal comfort seem urgent in the short term, but they have little weight in eternity. Integrity, truth, and faithfulness may not always bring immediate reward, but they endure when all else passes away. Correct thinking means evaluating decisions not only by their immediate effect, but also by their eternal significance. Consider how differently people would live if they thought with eternity in mind. Arguments over trivial matters would shrink. Fear of human opinion would lose its sting. The relentless chase for status or possessions would no longer enslave the heart. Instead, wisdom would guide decisions, courage would replace compromise, and peace would anchor the soul. Eternity is the ultimate measuring rod of truth, for it reveals what truly matters and what is merely a distraction. This eternal perspective also sharpens discernment in evaluating ideas. Many philosophies sound appealing because they promise quick fixes, temporary satisfaction, or worldly success. But when tested against eternity, they collapse. If a belief system cannot endure beyond the grave, then it cannot claim to be ultimate truth. To think correctly, therefore, is to test every worldview by the question, does this hold when measured against eternity? That question alone exposes the emptiness of countless ideologies and highlights the strength of truth that endures forever. Thinking with eternity in mind frees you from the tyranny of the urgent. It lifts your vision beyond the noise of the moment and anchors your mind in what is unshakable. It allows you to live wisely, to sacrifice joyfully, and to stand firmly, knowing that nothing done in alignment with truth is ever wasted. Correct thinking requires nothing less than an eternal perspective. The seventh principle of correct thinking is the courage to stand alone. Truth is rarely popular, and correct thinking will often set you at odds with the crowd. History is filled with examples of men and women who saw reality more clearly than their peers, but paid the price of rejection, ridicule, or persecution. To think correctly, you must be willing to walk this path. It is easy to drift with the current of majority opinion. It is far more difficult to resist the tide and hold to truth when it costs you comfort, reputation, or acceptance. Yet that courage is essential, for without it, all other principles collapse into compromise. Crowds are powerful. They offer security, belonging, and affirmation. The temptation to conform is strong because no one enjoys isolation. But the crowd is often wrong. Entire cultures have been led astray by consensus. Popularity does not sanctify error, nor does ridicule disprove truth. Correct thinking means you are willing to measure ideas not by the number of voices supporting them, but by their alignment with reality. If that alignment leaves you standing alone, then solitude becomes a badge of integrity rather than a mark of shame. The courage to stand alone does not mean arrogance or self-righteousness. It does not mean rejecting community or assuming superiority. Rather, it means loyalty to truth above loyalty to approval. It means you are willing to endure misunderstanding without bitterness and to face opposition without compromise. It demands inner strength rooted in conviction, not in stubbornness. Stubbornness clings to self. Courage clings to truth. One is driven by pride, the other by integrity. Standing alone also sharpens character. When you can no longer lean on the applause of others, you discover what you truly believe. Convictions become real when they are tested. Correct thinking is not proven in times of comfort, but in moments of pressure, when compromise seems easier than conviction. In those moments, courage is the dividing line between those who know truth and those who merely repeat it. This principle also provides clarity in leadership. A person who lacks the courage to stand alone cannot guide others. They will always bow to the loudest voices or chase the latest trend. But those who think correctly and stand firmly, even when isolated, inspire others to find their own courage. History honors not the conformists, but the men and women who were willing to be a minority of one when truth demanded it. The courage to stand alone flows from the recognition that truth is worth more than approval. Correct thinking may separate you from the crowd, but it unites you with reality, and reality will always outlast popularity. To think correctly, therefore, is to resolve in advance. Even if I must walk this road alone, I will not abandon truth. For in the end, the one who stands alone with truth is never truly alone at all.